I can almost guarantee that most of you are waiting too long to pull your nitrogen inputs, and by the time you get to week 7 of flower, your plants are already stacked with far more nitrogen that is going to be useful for them.
One of the biggest reasons your finishing profile is flatter than it might be and your flower structure is not as compact and tight as it could be is because of excess nitrogen levels for the plant's specific stage. And frankly, one of the biggest reasons people associate salt-grown flower with cardboard turps. It's been shown across various crops, including ours, through peer-reviewed studies that excessive nitrogen supply can reduce cannabinoid and secondary metabolite production. In cannabis specifically, increasing the nitrogen supply across the tested ranges has been associated with declining concentrations of most cannabinoids and terpenes, with the lowest nitrogen treatments often producing the highest secondary metabolite concentration.
It's a fine balance though, because we're providing ample nitrogen for bulking to supply that demand for increased biomass development, while intentionally running an increased root zone EC, creating a substantial mineral reserve through frequent fertigation events.
It's been pretty standard practice for decades now that we want to reduce our nitrogen inputs in later stages of flower, but we've wholly misinterpreted the concept with inconsistency and ineffective execution. The idea that by week 7 slowly reducing our nitrogen inputs is having the intended effect is misunderstanding the relationship between our media size, irrigation history, source sink dynamics, and our plant's need for continued nitrogen until the end of its life. As we wound down our bulk stage coming into week 6, the plant's biomass production has slowed significantly, right? We saw that mature leaves weren't that bright, vibrant green we saw a few weeks prior, the chlorophyll in some cases beginning to completely break down, and the early stages of senescence has started to ramp up. That's the sign we're waiting for specifically that indicates to us the demand for the constant supply of nitrogen from our inputs was no longer necessary, even though the plant will need nitrogen for the rest of its grow to fuel its various biological functions. Flushing out your media to run those nitrogen levels down only serves to wash out other elements the plant is going to end up in short supply of as a result of that flush, disrupt the osmotic environment in the root zone, and create a host of other issues we'd like to avoid at a stage your plants have limited amounts of energy to spare mitigating inefficiencies.
So what do? The key is understanding how weeks of feeding nitrogen consistently will behave in your system.
When I stacked my PWEC to 8 MSCM in transition, when I ran vegetative cues in bulk at a lower 5 MSCM, that was all minerals stacking up in my root zone through repeated fertigation events, and a very large portion of that nutrient supply included nitrogen. The plant was taking it up, building leaves, and storing a bunch of that nitrogen in its tissue.
So by week 6, there's lots of nitrogen available to your plants in the root zone, in the leaf. So when we talk about reducing nitrogen in late flower, we have to account for what's already sitting in the system before we can expect to meaningfully bring down the concentration that's in the tissue.
If I eliminate the calcium nitrate from my base nutrient solution with a calcium chloride replacement at week 6, add a little bit more irrigation volume to include a higher runoff volume starting in week 6, I'm slowly and in a controlled fashion bringing down the stacked nitrogen levels in the media while the plant uses the rest over the course of the next few days. In my system, calcium nitrate is one of the major nitrogen sources, so replacing that calcium contribution with calcium chloride lets me maintain calcium while minerally reducing nitrate input instead of diluting the whole nutrient profile. As external nitrogen availability declines while senescence progresses, the plant increasingly relies on nitrogen it already has assimilated and stored in older tissue. Those declining end stores in the senescing leaves can then be remobilized to continue supplying necessary biological functions through ripening while tissue nitrogen concentrations gradually fall. And this becomes another reason not to strip those leaves off in late flower. We're going to talk about the pathogen concerns and the role those leaves play in maintaining transpiration and hydraulic movement, but now there's another piece to it. Those senescing leaves are also nutrient stores the plant can dismantle and redistribute while external nitrogen availability is declining. The entire point of pulling nitrogen early is to give the system enough time to actually respond before the stage when I need those nitrogen levels lower. I'm accounting for nitrogen already accumulated in the media, the nitrogen stored in the plant, and the way the plant is going to use both of those reserves as it finishes.
If you found this explanation helpful, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.